people who work in adult entertainment, like, they want to work with people who are consenting. They want to work with people who are, because that's what keeps the lights on, right? That's what allows this product to keep happening. And if that is, not done correctly, that puts everybody at risk.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of On the Horizon, a podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it.
I'm Melrose Michaels, and you can find me at Melrose Michaels on social and melrosemichaels.com.
And I'm Lotus Lane, and you can find me on all social media at It's Lotus Lane, which is spelled ITSLOTUSLAIN. Also, just a reminder, if you're enjoying the podcast on Apple, to please leave us a 5-star review. That really helps us grow on the podcast and better share the information with our guests on the sex work community as a whole.
Who misses free and affordable ads without the anti-sex work rhetoric? Assembly 4 is a team of sex workers and technologists from Melbourne, Australia, aiming to bring back free and fair advertising to the sex work community. They also give back to organizations based in harm reduction, sex work, and education, stepping away from the clunky design of traditional platforms. Their platform, tris.link, is a refreshing and well-needed change in both presentation and mission. It's free to join and open to all. In the words of an A4 user, from the policies to the language to the advice and tips, it makes such a big difference to feel supported and encouraged instead of policed.
We have our special guest, Mickey Maud, my friend, here with us today to discuss a very important topic of the myth that there are a lot of underage people signing up for adult content websites or uploading their own underage images. So Mickey, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and let's get into this topic.
Well, hi, I'm Mickey Maud. I am an adult film performer. I've been in the industry for over 15 years. I've held roles in front of and behind the camera. I worked at kink.com for over 10 years in many capacities in production and as a creative director most recently. And currently, I'm one of the founding members of Collective Corruption, which is a BDSM collective of other performers, and we make BDSM content. And I do a wide range of content, but that's what I'm doing kind of right now. I've also worked not just behind the camera, but also behind the scenes as a web developer for kink.com. And so I get to see how I know kind of firsthand how adult sites implement the technology to kind of verify age. And so that's a little bit of my background. And thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, especially once you threw in that last little tidbit. I knew you had worked behind the scenes at kink.com, but I did not know about the web development aspect. So, I mean, would you care to get in a little bit on that and just how much goes in depth behind verification and uploading and all of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, probably one of the important things to kind of just say that, like, just bottom line from like a business model perspective, it is in the interest of adult entertainment to provide that barrier, right? That is going to, like, allowing CSAM material, which is called like child sexual abuse material, to be a part of their site, is going to just shut down the business model, right? And regardless of why people have this sort of like moral kind of panic around adult entertainment and what they might feel is this sort of like shameful industry, like the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of things in place to prevent people under 18 from being a part of that industry. It's called the adult industry for a reason. It separates itself as a space that is about consenting adults. And engaging in consent, really actively using their autonomy, and making their choice to engage with others in this very vulnerable, intimate space, and respecting those age of consent laws, which are like federally mandated. There's 2257, which is something that the federal government has said, hey, we only want people who are over 18 participating in this product. And this is something that every production has to go through. Lotus, you both have been a part of that, that system where you get to set, and, you have your IDs, and someone is checking your ID, and someone takes a photo, and someone is making sure that like your IDs are legit. You are who you say you are. You are, sober and in the right mind in order to, that you're feeling good to do the things that you are, consenting to do. That is also kind of mirrored on the digital side of things. When a company accepts a product, when a company, like say a shoot is made and it's going to go on a website, we want to make sure that all the paperwork is documented, that the model releases are there, the 2257 information is there, the IDs are not just there, but are up to date, that they're current and valid. A lot of times, a lot of companies will make sure that they keep reaching out to performers to make sure that those IDs are up to date, because they're using that material and it is, legally required. Although that is kind of like the record holding piece of this is kind of like in debate right now in the court system, because it used to be that you, as a producer, you had to have all of these files, all of your files ready and available in case the FBI or like local law enforcement wanted to come and say like, hey, we don't believe that like this scene with Lotus and Melrose is, Lotus looks a little like underage. We want to verify that. And you're supposed to be able to present like all of your documents immediately. That's currently in litigation right now, because I think the way that it's kind of structured is that they don't need a warrant to do it. And as people want to say that like, you have to have a warrant to do things. Even our ex-president is having some issues with that right now. These things, this system has been put in place a long time. And people who work in adult entertainment, like, they want to work with people who are consenting. They want to work with people who are, because that's what keeps the lights on, right? That's what allows this product to keep happening. And if that is, not done correctly, that puts everybody at risk. That shuts the whole operation down. So there's just this basic business level. Not to mention right, like if we're all good people, like we're doing the things where we want to keep everybody safe, but just on like, even if you think that people who work in the adult industry are kind of the scum of the earth, even the scum of the earth keeps wanting to make money. And that's the reason that I kind of presented it like that, because there are going to be people who are going to listen to this and I think this is just the eternal struggle, right? Like there are people who like hear sex worker and part of their brain shuts down to like any sort of conversation that could happen, any sort of like empathy that can happen.
And this is the thing that you get this conflation from the kind of religious moral right, that all things pornography are just automatically bad, and the argument that comes up right now that they seem to be latching onto is that like trafficking, child endangerment is baked into the business model, that like the pornographers just don't care and are willing to do. And if we just kind of think about like, all right, if that were true, right? If that were true, how would that actually work? And in posing it in this way to kind of really kind of break down that argument, because to exploit somebody, to do this horrible thing and exploit somebody, and then to kind of put it on we're going to put it on browsers, we're going to put it on right. Pornhub. Right. It's not a very good plan. And it's not to say that they're like bad criminals, but like the porn industry has been around for a while, and like I've been in it for a while, and I feel that like there are a lot of checks and balances in place that if somebody were to be that malicious and that like evil, that and there have been people who have been shitty people in the industry, I'm not going to lie, but that usually gets noticed and rooted out pretty quick when it comes to these sort of things. When it comes to like that level of exploitation, like nobody wants to be around that. Nobody wants to tolerate that, because the whole thing will shut down. It is, we're already on the fringes of society, and to kind of have to deal with that or to have to like tolerate that, is just it's intolerable in any space.
I was gonna say that's interesting that you brought up all the checks and balances we have now. It made me remember how there was once back in the 80s with Tracy Lords, like
Tracy Lords, yeah,
the only people that did actually perform underage. And I think that was because it was in a time before all the checks and balances got put into place. Like, we have learned our lessons from mistakes of the past of letting people slip through the cracks. Like you said, the majority of the people in the adult industry want to keep things adult, want to keep things legit, and want business to continue. So the fact that that happened way back then in the 80s and hasn't happened again really shows like how 2257 and all that other stuff really works, has been put into place, and we really put it into practice.
Yeah, and I think even when you look at the details of the Tracy Lords situation, that was at a time where just like a lot of things like didn't have the level of scrutiny that they do today. And it was, presented as a situation where it was even presented as a situation where like this teenager was trying to like take advantage of the system in order to like work.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that like a lot of people, when you hear this argument against porn in general, just like you're hearing this the anti-abortion argument, and there's no space for us after they get what they want, right? They haven't announced their plan of like, oh, once we get rid of the pornography, here's how we're going to integrate sex workers back into society and give them jobs with dignity. Like, that's not a part of that plan. And I think we're having all these conversations about labor and what it means to work when you have this situation where a lot of people are like leaving their jobs, thinking about what their jobs are, thinking about this space where you have to work to survive. That sort of relationship is, and we're always seen as like, oh well, you can't find a real job, so you're doing porn, right? Like, we're always seen as like this fringe that can't make it anywhere else. But there's a lot of flexibility and autonomy that we have to say like, no, like I choose to go to work, suck this dick, get fucked in the ass, do whatever I'm going to do. And then I get paid and I go home and I get to choose the next time that I work. I get to, and I know that that's not the experience for everybody, but how is that any different than a situation where you're like, I'm gonna choose to work this fast food job and I'm going to be on the fry station today, and like that's what I choose to do. And like, while one person may view this thing with integrity and the other person may like look down upon this thing, like it's the same thing. You have to eat, you have to like live, like you have to have that sort of social contract with that job in order to get those things.
Yeah. And something else you said too on the topic of exploitation, when they're talking about jobs that the society views as more dignified, they don't often talk about the exploitation in all these other labor forces. So it's interesting that I love that you brought that up as well.
Yeah, because it always seems like adult industry is put the blame for any kind of trafficking, as if trafficking doesn't exist, like in the agriculture community.
Yeah.
People being shipped in from Mexico and stuff like that. But one of the other things that I wanted to talk about on the subject of like people assuming that nowadays there's a lot of infiltration of young people, underage people being able to upload, because they still tend to think like this stereotype that we don't care, that things are just unregulated in our industry, that people are getting away with all kinds of stuff here. What do you, I mean, what websites are you on? What sites are you on? And speak to the process of how difficult that would actually be to upload underage content on a site, whether it be an underage person themselves or someone trying to do that of underage.
So websites that I'm on right now, I actually just recently kind of reduced the number of websites that I'm on just because of just logistical ease of uploading content. So right now I'm only on OnlyFans, but I've signed up for a lot of different websites and I've gone through their age verification process. Right now, what is kind of most common of like a process, and I just OnlyFans, every so often they want you to kind of re-verify, like usually when they do like a change of like the terms of service, or they were like, like some content that they want you to like, you forgot to tag another performer on, sometimes you'll go through this re-verification process. So generally what you'll need to do is that you have to take a photo of like your ID, your driver's license, your passport, right? Like that's the general sort of like, we're all used to that sort of age check when you go to a bar, right? You order a drink, you buy alcohol at a grocery store, you show your ID, person like a bartender, person behind the counter, like checks it. They're like, okay, like you were born on this day, like that's great. Nowadays, you have to like take a photo of that. Maybe you take a photo of the back. Maybe you put in like the numbers, right? That can be checked against the database. Like that can be checked against these records that verify that like this person's ID is legitimate, right? But IDs can be fixed, right? So then another thing that you have to do is like you have to take a photo with you holding your ID so that your image matches the image like or closely enough to the image on your ID. A lot of like sites now will do some facial recognition scan where you kind of like will like give them the whole, if you have an iPhone, you're used to kind of this process where you kind of like tilt your head a little bit so you can get this full scan. There are a number of websites that are doing kind of video recording because video is a lot harder. Like the skill level involved with kind of doing this sort of deep fake technology is not as accessible as Photoshop. And there's lots of different ways that companies are trying to implement this sort of age verification like software, and making sure that people are who they say they are. I think that there is like, and it's really, I think the level of and this is something that like I recently like had like a conversation with a person who works at Reddit, who kind of reached out to me and was like, how can we kind of support and empower like performers? And it was like, well, I think one thing that like we need is a bit more transparency from the tech industry side. Who is this third party age verification company? Where does my information go? Where being on the fringe of societies, you're not exactly trusting of institutions. You're not exactly trusting of platforms who might kick you off of that platform the next day. So I looked into like the age verification company that OnlyFans uses, and it's called Yoti, which is actually started by Instagram, so Meta. Which, as we all know, Instagram loves sex workers. They love even writing the word sex, right? Like, I think currently we're all writing like sex eggs, like now on everything, which I just can't like not think of like eggs when I see when
I see that, I think of eggs, and then I think of those impregnation eggs.
Yes.
And then I'm like, well, that's a little deep. That's way deep. And I know we're not talking about that. So for me, I use the little European E symbol, and I use SE because my mind always goes into those sex eggs.
Interesting. It's like I love this little window into your mind, Lotus.
Yeah, so I use that because it makes me think of more like sex and money.
Yeah.
Smart. I like that.
No, it's interesting that it's the same company because I never knew that.
Ooh, I love that you dove deep into the research.
This is something that I'm as I'm getting older, and as I'm kind of thinking about what my next steps are going to be, and I'm thinking about like how can I give back to the community that I'm a part of. I just kind of grew up in a way where like whatever community you're a part of, like you leave it better than you found it. And I'm trying to think about like, right, I have like these different like backgrounds and these different disciplines, and like, I'm working to kind of like educate people on like the resources that are available to them. And I think in this digital space where we're you know always coming up against like censorship, we're coming up against like these ways that our communities aren't able to communicate, and then we're having to kind of hop from platform to platform or kind of piecemeal these things. And I'm really trying to like hope that like I can kind of find this place that is kind of combine some of those things and can support the community in like this area, because I feel like, right, sex workers need this sort of electronic frontiers foundation that says like, hey, like face recognition, like there needs to be some guidelines. Artificial intelligence, there need to be some guidelines. And generally, like, that is when organizations come up with those policies, it's generally kind of marketed towards the masses. And then we kind of get like obscured, or, there are these cases where you're like, yes, that works really well for some people, but it doesn't work well for a lot of people. And I've seen cases where like people really want like when Facebook really wants people to use their real legal names, and I'm like, that works fine for some people, but it doesn't work for domestic violence survivors.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't work for people who need to kind of obscure their identity a little bit. It doesn't work for kind of performers of all types in mainstream who, need to kind of keep that sort of aesthetic distance, right? I think these things that people don't think about because it doesn't affect them, there needs to be clarity on verification processes, whether it's age verification or getting that little blue check on Twitter, so that I know that Lotus is Lotus, and this person who's messaging me, trying to like sell me a custom video, who is some dude in Latvia who is like running some scam, I can fact check that. Like, you want to protect us, help us get into the light, help us get into this space where like we can kind of participate. When I spoke to that person who worked at Reddit, they were like, well, what are these other things we could do? Like, bring us in to like, tell you like what is going to like work for us. We keep running into the situation where everybody wants to make rules around us, but nobody wants to hear about what we actually need.
Yeah. From us, from our community. Something you said, and I want to kind of also retouch on, is like, especially on OnlyFans, because that's seemingly like one of the targets right now, aside from Pornhub and everything they're going through. OnlyFans recently started verifying users too, where users have to ID check to get verified on the platform. Yeah, because there's this new thing, well, not new, but the next point of attack is all the user generated content, because while the models and creators are being verified on what we're sending out, now we have this new ecosystem where users can message us content like for dick ratings and like all these common things that we're super used to. But in reality, we don't have an age verification on the user outside of them having a credit card on file. So, which in some cases, I think that's what the companies have relied on so far, is like, well, they have a credit card on file, so we know they're 18. But that's not necessarily enough in terms of legislation and policy. So I think that seeing OnlyFans kind of take lead on that and start verifying users is very telling as to what the next conversation might be about. So just letting people who aren't maybe in sex work and are listening or tuning in know that like this is now beyond just our community, and this is impacting other people using these products and services we offer, because there's a lot of users who are like, well, it wants me to get verified, but like I'm not comfortable doing that. I'm like, well, your credit card's already on file, so you might as well just verify.
Yeah.
But I think that's fair to have that concern over your privacy, especially once you said that the company linked to Meta is the one that does the age verifications for people like us, because they don't have a healthy relationship with people like us. They don't treat us fairly. So to know that all of our ID verification are in the hands of people that deal with people that pretty much hate us is unsettling, to say the least. Because they also have that same information for those of us that have tried verification and have been denied. So where is the denial coming from? Like, where is the disconnect? What's really going on at those verification centers? What are they doing with that information? Because we know Meta sells information or has sold in the past. And we even know at this point that they provided it to law enforcement because we heard of an abortion, a teenager that had an abortion. Her and her mother's DM messages over Facebook, which is a Meta company, got sent to police. So now it's a real concern, and I'm glad that you brought that up because we aren't often brought to the table in these conversations. We're just legislated around until we're eventually boxed out and on an island trying to do our own thing again from the undergrounds of the internet.
Yeah. Too, it occurred to me when you were saying that, Lotus, that there's the way like Meta and Facebook has integrated into so many programs and systems, like you can sign up for an app using Facebook and you can do all of these things using Facebook or Meta or Instagram as like the third party anchor to all of these products. Like because someone had said this recently, like, well, if you're uncomfortable with it, just delete it off your phone. And that's such a simple solution to such a nuanced, like complex problem, because if I delete Facebook off my phone, all of those things I had signed up for with other apps or, softwares are no longer valid. Or like, for example, even when I stream on Twitch gaming, I use a software that takes my output stream and puts it on multiple platforms, puts it on Facebook, on YouTube, on whatever, all at the same time. And if I didn't have a Facebook account or a Facebook business account, I couldn't use that software. So like, it's very easy to say like, just don't use it or just delete it. I'm like, but it's integrated into our lives where you almost can't not use it at this point.
Yeah.
And what happens? Let's play this out like a little further in this sort of Handmaid's Tale sort of world that America's already kind of going down, right? So let's say this company that owns like the age verification, right? They have all this data, right? They basically have like, all right, Lotus, I have like at some point, right, like you are connected to your stage name, right? Your legal name is connected to your stage name somewhere on some database, right? And we already know that companies like Meta will share information with law enforcement when laws change, like, subject to the jurisdiction, right? When we become, in a situation where we're going to go up on the wall, right? Or, at the bare minimum, Facebook is like, well, we don't want those people on our platform either. So you don't have a Facebook account, right? So then what do you have access to, right? Who else do they share that information with? And, we see all these other places where, sex workers are denied service. Like we hear about like, people losing like their Airbnb accounts and people are like, well, how did they even know? So at some point, somewhere, this information is being shared. So when you're flagged as a sex worker, like how many different places does that show up? And does that keep you from maybe, down the line, getting a loan so you can't get a house,
right?
Putting your kid into a school, right? There's the potential, and this is why the transparency is so important, right? Like, so that does not get exploited, and so that groups of people don't get exploited. And to think that it won't happen, it's like it already has happened. There's already bias in the system. There's already, there's already not enough people involved in it where like face recognition doesn't work so well with darker skinned people because no darker skinned people were brought to the table when developing this software. There's bias in like, lots of like AI generated sort of like banking systems because like that was, built on a system that already biased people. It's scary to think about, but like there's the speed at which technology is becoming like more integrated in our lives in a way like Melrose, you were saying that like you can't just delete it off your phone because like all of a sudden like like the key to opening so many doors is that's what you're throwing away.
Yeah.
It's concerning. It feels heavy. I'm sorry, it's hot in here.
It's heavy.
These topics are hard to discuss because it's not even just like, it really struck me when you said that like Lotus's stage name at some point is linked to her legal name, like all of ours is at some point. But it's so direct because if Meta owns that verification software that's running our biometrics for facial scanning. And obviously all of our banking is hooked directly to things like OnlyFans. Like, so at what point does the banking institution decline our services, which happens all the time because of what we do for work? So like this affects and has huge implications that it's very easy to overlook if you don't understand it.
Yeah. Like what if that were to happen to like Gmail, right? Right. Like if it happens to like, right, like say it happens to like the big companies, right? Like there's some, which would only take some, like it happens in other countries, right? Like it takes just some federal level legislation, right? And then if you can't use those services, like I'm not the type of person who can kind of like rough it and then just kind of start my life like living in the woods. Like I grew up in Oakland. That's just not what we were raised to do. And if I had to kind of start all over, like without technology, that would be extremely difficult. And like, who knows if me and my family would make it the same way, and I think this is one of the reasons that like, it's a really difficult place to be in for our industry because there's kind of safety in the sort of anonymity. And then the consumers have always been in secret, right? Like, Donkey Dick 69 on like in the chat room, who's really like, John Smith somewhere, he doesn't have to worry about anything coming back on him. Like he can call his credit card company and be like, I don't know who did that, right? He doesn't have to be verified. And at the same time, when things like Prop 60 and AB5 and like Sesta Fosta like affects sex workers, like he also doesn't have to stand up and say like, hey, actually, you know what? Like I buy this content.
Yeah, they could stay anonymous and just watch things happen and maybe complain that porn isn't the way it used to be or something like that, but without even realizing all of the hurdles that we're dealing with just to create this entertainment.
Yeah, paying for your porn isn't enough anymore.
Yeah.
Like you got to be out about your porn. Like you got to be out about your consumption of sex work. Otherwise, that is what's going to disappear. It's always presented as like, oh, the porn industry is like making all this content and people are getting like sucked in. And like, with this from this like temptation. I'm like, no, because there's money there, fool. Like that's why we do it. Like we do it for the same reason you go to your job. Like it's not like we're like, ooh, let's get the soul count up. Like that's for the dark side. Like that is not like you. If you think we're that organized, like if we were like go to Twitter, we're not that organized.
Exactly. Like, we're not a cohesive like one-minded brain at all. And I don't even see that we're actively like recruiting or coercing like young people, under 18-year-olds or anything of that matter to join in porn.
Actually, the common, conversation I've had with other sex workers is cautioning people who just turned 18 to wait until their early or mid 20s to really get involved heavily in porn, because that's when you really can find your voice and your boundaries and be able to communicate that. Like, I think looking back, like I'm happy about when I got into the industry, it was like 1920-ish. And while like totally a consenting adult, completely aware of what I'm doing, because of my age and lack of experience and also lack of community, I think I would have done better if I had more sex workers around me to kind of guide me through that process. But it was harder for me to say, like in my own voice, like, no, like that's a boundary and that's a hard no, because when you're younger, you're a little bit more influential or influenceable. So like, I know a lot of sex workers like who are like, oh, when I turn 18, I'm launching an OnlyFans, or potential sex workers who want to launch at 18. And I'm always like, give it a few years. Like, just think, chew on it first. Like, you don't need to jump into it. There's no rush, it's not going anywhere. Well, hopefully.
How do we support that waiting when the most common marketing term is teen?
Yes. Right? Actually, like, I love that you brought this up, because that's the new campaign.
And this is, I think, what kind of connects to like, like paying for your porn is not enough. Like you have to be out about your porn, just like, right. Like, and this bear with me here. I'm gonna go someplace and I'm gonna kind of bring it around. Right. So whenever like there's some superhero blockbuster movie and they make a casting decision or they like delay the release of something, like all the fans like are on Twitter and you're just like, this is bullshit, such and 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 such. And now you see like those companies are just like, actually, you know what? You're right. That's a bad idea. We're not going to do that. That's because, right, we're to talk about movies, to talk about mainstream film, to talk about comic book movies, totally normal, totally socialized. Like you can do that. Talking about porn, talking about the sex work that you consume, totally shamed. And so we don't do it. And the product doesn't change. And like the working environment doesn't change. And this is what I'm talking about. Kind of like bringing things into the light has to come on like both sides, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of things. And Lotus, I know we've talked about this for years, right? Like, and just just being a person of color in this industry, like, there's a lot of things that like, right? I wish that that wasn't like the situation, but I got to pay my bills, right?
Yeah.
And that's across all different industries, right? And I think the only thing that like is going to like happen is that there needs to be this sort of change of this sort of hierarchical like model between like um you know companies, performers, and consumers, right?
Yeah.
Like, and when we kind of bring this, and that's what you see these fan sites kind of leveraging, right? Like, you don't have to. There are a lot of people who I know who like would be like, who were sex workers, were like, I would never do porn because of like the decisions that like, like I would, that you have to like make. I don't want to do that. But once OnlyFans came around, they're like, yeah, I'm
Okay.
all about OnlyFans because like I do what I want, and
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing. If that works for you and you can do that hustle, like that's great. You should be able to do that. But it still doesn't put the pressure on like these changes that need to be made so that like, right, someone who's like, thinking about it, 17 about to turn 18, can really kind of like understand, okay, well, what is this that I really need to kind of like, be a part of? And it doesn't put on the consumer to be like, why is it that like we're clicking on teen so much as a search term? Like, why is it that like we're still using terms that like communities like, have deemed to be like unacceptable to use to describe them anymore?
Right.
Um, and that dialogue with a consumer just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the product doesn't feel like it needs to change.
Yeah, no,
So
I agree.
so true. I don't think that that's ever really brought up enough or at all, really, that the consumer, not just that they need to be out and proud about whether they support porn and watch it and view it. And it's like, yeah, if there's changes that need to be made, don't tell us about it in the DMs of our OnlyFans. That's not going to change the industry because that's usually where I end up hearing things, or in the comment threads on an Instagram post of mine. Like the powers that be, production companies, um, casting, all of that, they're not looking in those areas to decide. They're looking at algorithms, they're looking at data, they're looking at forums if you're a member on their site. I would just love to see what that would be like if fans were out and proud and actively demanding on Twitter, on the open internet, for certain things to be better, for certain terms to go away, or for certain terms to be updated. I mean, even as far as now we're in 2022, entering 2023, and we still have like the binary as far as like categories, like, or I guess it's like just the trinary, like we just like, okay, men, women, trans, and then that's it. But we're now entering this moment in time where so many people identify as non-binary. Like, how hard is it to just put an extra category on there, or just as time and sexuality develops and we're adapting new scenes to different tastes, why can't we adjust the categorization as well? And like, I think teen could also be one of those that gets adjusted, if we are open to having that kind of open conversation. We
Yeah. I,
public consumer.
we can't have a society where teen is like such a highly searched word, but you have laws that prevent people from getting an abortion in the cases of incest or rape.
Mhm.
Right? You can't, like, those two things can't go together and expect people to keep their sanity.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can't, it burns my soul sometimes that, like, when you realize that this country does not have unified age of consent laws still.
Yeah.
Like, there's still states that have age of consent laws that are under 18 currently.
Mm-hmm.
Coincidentally, most of those states also have these, like, fucked up abortion laws that they're putting in place.
Mm-hmm.
It, it, we're not willing to, like, people want to deal with the porn, right?
Right.
People don't want to deal with, like, because they see it, like, porn as, like, causing the things that they don't want to deal with and refuse to deal with. Like, we know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. They're complete polar opposites, and like it's cyclical too, because like one thing leads to another, and then I'm tongue-tied.
And given the fact that probably there's a severe lack of sex education also in those same states, like just in a circle, like lack of sex education, too much access to porn with no sex education or even healthcare, and it's just kind of like what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. You can't have abortions. Can we have condoms? No. Can we have sex ed? No, because then you're going to have sex. Well, it's like, but people are already having sex. And like, you're not providing sex ed, so we're looking at porn. Well, porn can't be sex ed.
And it must be the porn.
Yeah.
It must be the porn. Can you give them sex ed? No.
Then it must be porn.
I was wondering, Mickey, if you could speak a little bit too, because I feel like a lot of times when I'm having conversations with non-sex workers, they don't understand even like the lengths performers go to get content that is leaked or inappropriate sites removed from the internet and like scrubbed from the internet. Could you talk a little bit about like DMCA and like what that process looks like?
Yeah. So DMCA, which I'm blanking on the acronym now.
Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Yes, Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So, basically, like, this is one of the things that we get from the mainstream world is once the internet, like, started catching up to like being able to kind of stream video, people were like, here's this movie that I just ripped from the DVD and put out there, right? Like, here's this music that I put, that I just, burned from, ripped from this CD when people use CDs. And in order to like protect like this intellectual property, which, includes porn, even though we're not considered intellectual property, we need a system to say like, hey, like this person who is posting this content doesn't have the rights to it. Can we remove this? And that process is really intense for getting your content removed. And this is where it commonly happens is tube sites, right? And I've gone through this. I don't know very few performers who haven't gone through it. And right, like one of two things happens. Like, you're just like, well, fuck it. Like, it's out there. I can't like undo that. Like, you find that your content, like that you don't want on a tube site is out there, and you're like, you try to get it removed, and you're like, and has like 8 million views. I'm not reaping any of the benefit from that. Let me get this taken down. So probably first step that you do is you try to contact like the tube site. And you're like, hey, like this is my content. I have, rights to this content. Like, I don't consent to this content being on your website. Can I take that down? 9 times out of 10, like that site will just be like, well, prove it. And this is why, like, this is one of the reasons that like these tube sites verifying like the people who upload the content, like, are like, that's a great thing for us, because then it puts some accountability on like who, exactly, who, uploaded the content, and you can kind of like, you have their legal information to kind of follow up and hold them accountable. If they don't, then it's just like, well, so-and-so said that they have like I can't prove that they don't have the content, right? They don't have rights to the content. You gotta get put into this kind of like back and forth where you're trying to get a company to kind of like take it down. You're trying to kind of find out like who uploaded it in the first place. You're trying to find out like how many places it's been uploaded, tube sites that you've never even heard of, tube sites within tube sites within tube sites. You know, I and this, you know, is I think what, you know, what happens a lot of times is like things get like copied, and you can recopy things infinite amount of times. And so like it can be in so many places that this task to go, you know, just sending like one email to one company, right? That's multiplied over like 1,000 different like, you know, sites. So even though you might get this response or like, oh, well, how do you prove that your content is your content? You're like, hey, like this is my Twitter and this is where, you know, I'm, you know, then you have to prove that your Twitter is your Twitter and not some weird person who is impersonating you.
Without any verification badges.
Exactly. Right. And then, you know, and which is like, you know, if you're Asa Akira, right, that's easy to get that verification badge, right? Like that's, but then, right, do I need to prove who I am to some other company that I don't know? Do I need to now go through some verification process to get my content removed? Yeah. And you hope that you can get you know, you send this like this DMCA request, and that's basically saying like, hey, like this is kind of almost like my affidavit saying that like this is my content. Please, you know, remove this from your site. Like you don't have rights to display this content outside of like these spaces. And there are companies that will, you know, help do this process for you, where you can like give them a bunch of links and they'll send out the DMCAs, and like you hope that like those companies will respond. And it's really up to those companies that are making money off of it.
Yeah.
You know, those uploaders are making like a piece of it, or just kind of contributing to like having more free porn because that's the world that they want to live in.
Yeah. It's tough too, because as soon as the content is uploaded outside of the US, a lot of the legal system fails us beyond that. So like once you're on like a Russian tube site, or like you said, sites inside sites, because I've had that experience, you're just kind of like, well, that's that. Like there's nothing else I can do at that point. So yeah, that's been my experience too. And then it's also like the burden shouldn't fall on us and our already marginalized group of laborers to also then have to pay for a service that we could have not needed if platforms just verified us as the creators that we are. Like this could have all been avoided. So it seems like not only are we losing on the front end, but then we're almost like being, you know, exploited on the other end when you need a DMCA service.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a heavy episode, guys. All that news. Oh man. Well, this has been good though, because I feel like Mickey, you gave a lot of education on the back end and how many like fail safes there are to keep underage people from the upload process and from trying to get around it. And also like the hoops we have to go to once content is leaked and is out there. So I think you gave everyone who's listening like the best crash course ever. I really appreciate you for coming on. This has been phenomenal. Can you let everyone know where they can find you and all of your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the Mickey Mod on Twitter, and the same on OnlyFans. Like I try to keep it, you know, very simple to find me. So it's the Mickey Mod on Twitter, OnlyFans, and Instagram. And you can find some of my work on collective corruption right now. That's kind of the main thing that I'm kind of promoting. We'll be at Folsom Street Fair. We'll have a booth. Yeah, I mean, I think I just kind of want to say, like, in closing, is that like nobody makes a big deal about Facebook having CSAM content on their platform when they've had 20 million cases of CSAM content. And OnlyFans, to like my last check, the research I could find, has had 10 cases.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
So you have politicians who are lobbying to get OnlyFans shut down because of these 10 cases.
Right. And while you have Facebook, the most public thing out there that has millions and no one's even looking in that direction.
And apparently has the infrastructure to run biometrics on sex workers to verify us. So interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, heavy episode, y'all. If you want to have me come back and talk about like positions and doing it and shit, like I'm more than welcome to. Let's talk about something much later in the future. It's not always like this. Lotus can attest to that.
Yeah, Mickey can have some fun.
I love that. Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you back because this was phenomenal. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.
This segment of today's episode is sponsored by Sex.com, one of the absolute best content creator platforms out there. It looks better than any other, has a higher level of security than any other, and boasts over 3 million unique visitors a day scrolling through viral looped adult short form videos. Sex.com is like, well, sex itself. A lot of people do it. Some just do it much, much better than the others. Sex.com. If you're gonna do it right.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of On the Horizon, a podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it.
I'm Melrose Michaels, and you can find me at Melrose Michaels on social and melrosemichaels.com.
And I'm Lotus Lane, and you can find me on all social media at It's Lotus Lane, which is spelled ITSLOTUSLAIN.